Now, you don't need me to tell you that this is a pretty ropey old wall. So what we're going to do with this wall, rather than rendering it or trying to repair the brickwork, we're going to put some external wall insulation over it. One for cosmetics, just to tidy the whole thing up. But the other thing is it will dramatically improve the insulation in the building. So it's a win-win as far as that goes. But before we do that, there's the issue of damp in the wall. Now, it doesn't look too bad here. It's got a reasonable overhang, but just as a precaution, we're going to put some dry rods in all the way along to stop any possibility of rising damp, because the last thing we want is for that damp to be creeping up behind the external wall insulation. The external wall insulation is breathable. It's not a closed cell structure. It's an open structure. The moisture that's in the wall will evaporate out of the wall, but we don't want to be constantly feeding it with new moisture. We know that it's a 9-inch wall, 225 millimeters. So we're going to set this drill so that we're just short of that by 25 mil, so we don't come through the other side. And then I'm just going to drill holes along the perps. So one there, one there, one there. And I'll just go all the way along, put the rods in. And what they do is there's siloxane inside the rods which leaches out. It's attracted by the moisture. So if there's any moisture in the wall, it leaches out and it lines the pores inside the mortar itself. So we're not trying to drill the brick. We're not trying to form a barrier across the bricks. We're forming a barrier along the mortar line. I've primed this bit of aircrete block with some dilute SBR. The rest of it, when I run my hand over the brickwork, I'm not picking up any dust, I'm not picking up anything from it, so that's fine. We can stick directly onto that, but just remember you can't stick to dust, so if in doubt, prime. Now, in the EWI store, they sell a repairing mortar which goes off in about 10 minutes, super sticky stuff. So if you've got something like this and you need to dub out, you need to fill in all those holes, then that's the product to use, because 10 minutes later you can be putting the adhesive on. And you can see here where the rainwater pipe has leaked and it's run down, eaten all the mortar away, but it's left this green mould. We need to get rid of that, because the last thing you want to do is leave that there and it starts to activate and creep up behind the insulation. So just give it a good anti-fungicidal wash, scrub all the green mould off, and then you're ready to go. So this is the second part of a starter tray. It's the same length as a starter tray, but don't make the mistake of using it as it is. Straddle the join, because if you do that, you're joining the two pieces together, and that will mean that you'll get a nice straight line and you can put your rest of your fixings in. Now, they do make aluminium trays as well as plastic ones. You might think that if you're using plastic, there's no chance of you cutting yourself, but if you run your fingers down the edge of that, that is sharp, believe me. So the starter track is actually fixed back against the wall, but it's kind of a little bit meandering, but you don't worry at this stage. So long as it's fixed back, what I'm going to do is put the insulation in place, and then I'm going to prop it underneath, get the spirit level and make sure it's all right. Then when the adhesive is set, that will be absolutely level in line. So this is the adhesive that we're using for this. We don't have to worry about cleaning that bucket out too much. When it comes to the top coat, we definitely want to be clean. Think of the top coat as plaster. When it comes to mixing adhesive, most people just open the bag, chuck it into the water and whisk it up. If you read the instructions, which nobody ever does, it tells you how much water to use per bag, so measure it out, then whisk it up, and then it says leave it for 10 minutes. So there's your cup of tea time, because if you don't leave it for 10 minutes, it stiffens up. You go to use it, you've got no movement, you let those polymers over that 10 minutes soak into the water, and then the whole thing needs to be re-whisked. Just give it another spin through, and then after that you've got about 2 hours to use it, and it's a lot more pliable. Honestly, so many people make this mistake. Chuck it into the water, whisk it up and go because they're in a rush. Have that cup of tea. Now, another common mistake that people make is that they look at the mix, they think, okay, that's all right, and then 10 minutes later they come back and they think, oh, I'll add a bit more powder, a bit more water, it's not quite right. And if you do that after you've let it have that 10 minutes, it's a terrible thing to do. The adhesive will not work as it's supposed to. This is highly engineered stuff. But if you need to add powder or water to it to get it right, do that before that 10 minutes of settling time, if you like, then you'll be okay. But after that 10 minutes of settling time, don't try messing with it. So there's a lot of different ways of applying the adhesive. The important thing is you've got to get the perimeter covered. It also needs something in the middle because you're going to be putting these fixings through the board, and you don't want to be putting them where there's an air pocket behind. You want to be putting them where there's adhesive. So that way you're supporting it on the fixing. So if you did it in 3 lines, absolutely fine. But this way we know that we're one in the middle, one either side. You can see I really got quite a thick bed here, but that's because this wall is all over the place. If I was doing it on something like render carrier board, all I'd have to do, because it's nice and flat, nice and straight, is just use a notch trowel through to do it. But obviously you've got to adjust it. Now another thing that some people get wrong is that when they come to a window here, because it's easy, because they think, oh, I'm just going to put a sheet there and up there, and they think, okay, we've got a bit of a bond there, but it's not really good enough. What you need is to half bond it and then do your L shape, because if you do an L shape you haven't got that straight line which will crack later. So it's very, very important that you keep that bond all the way through and that you avoid straight lines like the plague. Exactly the same as plasterboarding or anything else. Now I made a little bit of a schoolboy error because I should have actually taken that flush with the top of the seal, because when we come to put the cover on, the cover needs to sit on top of the existing seal and slightly down so that it runs off. But you can see what I've done here. I've cut it below rather than on that line. It's not the end of the world because it's very forgiving. I can get a bit of adhesive, a little bit of an offcut and pack that up. But on the next one, I'm going to get it right. I'm amazed at how much open time you get with this adhesive. I mean, it's an hour and a half now since I mixed it up and it's still pretty workable. Now obviously that's going to change in the hot weather. It's going to go faster, but it's pretty good. There might be people who are looking at this saying, why are you bothering with that adhesive? If you've got a flat wall, why don't you just mechanically fix it? Just drill it, plug it. If you do that, there is a tendency for the boards to move. It might not happen straight away, it might be 6 months, it might be a year down the line, but at some point they will move and you will see cracks. So although the adhesive is a bit more expensive, obviously it adds a stage to it. Don't try and skimp on it, because that's the difference between a job which will last and having callbacks. This rasping is essential for a number of reasons. One is that you can see there's a few lips on the boards where I haven't quite got it flush. So this will give us a nice flush board, which will save us on adhesive, because the flatter we get this, the flatter we can get that base coat going on. We only want to put that base coat on, say, what, 4 mil, something like that, 6 mil maybe, no more than that. So getting this flat is essential. But also, these are made of oil, these boards, okay? So in the hot weather, they will sweat slightly. You get a kind of a shiny film on the board, and the adhesive doesn't stick brilliantly to the shiny film. So if we get rid of that, we just knock that back, get rid of the shine on the board, the adhesive has a much better chance of sticking. At the top here, we've got the EPS joining some OSB, so that's two different materials. And whenever you get two different materials, you get differential movement. You get expansion and contraction of one or the other. So what we've got here is an expanding foam tape. We put that into the gap and it miraculously expands over an hour or two, and that fills that gap. And of course, if there's any movement there, it will go on there. So we're going to cover that anyway. This is really good practice, saves any water leaking down behind the EPS. It saves those cracks. Now I've got to admit that because this is my first go at this stage I would think, all right, let's get the mechanical fixings in, let's get that drilling and that plugging done. But the guys at EWI Store giving me a few pointers here. That's the good thing. They're not just selling you the kit, they will give you advice. And what they said to me is, don't do that. Get all your beads set up, get those stuck with the adhesive, because while that's setting, you can be doing all your drilling and fixing. If you do it the other way round, you've done all your drilling and fixing, then you've got to do your beads, then you've got to wait for the adhesive to dry. Now it comes to the time when I'm going to fix the mesh, but I didn't do this before I did the rasping, because if you do, all those little granules get into here and it means you've got to vacuum the whole lot out. You've got to get rid of those because you don't want those going into your base coat. So rasp first, clean up, then put your angle beads and all the rest of it, your trims up. Something else that I've just learned, and I never ever knew this. I've used this mesh quite a lot in the past, but I didn't realise that it will absorb water. The same goes for the trims. All this mesh is a kind of, it's not exactly plastic as we know it, it's a water-based product. It's absorbing water, so you must keep it in the dry. And what I've had in the past, I've had problems. I've put a piece of mesh on, the whole thing's dropped down, you know, because it's too heavy. And that's because I've left it out in the rain, it's absorbed water, it's twice the weight it was, and then you have trouble sticking it. So keep it dry, guys, that's all. So the important thing here is let's keep these overlaps on the mesh everywhere, because if you do that, it saves any chance of cracking. So obviously when you're drilling, you've got to watch out for the depth. You don't want to go any deeper than this really, just this plus a little bit, say 10 mil. So that bit of tape on the drill is absolutely fine. It's just worth checking what wall you're drilling into. Measure your wall, try and avoid any cables if you think there are cables in the wall. Very simple thing you can do. If there are areas where you don't want to drill because of cables or something else, just mark it up. When you put the adhesive up, if there's something behind there, then at least that tells you not to drill there. So you can see that the pin that goes through the middle is GRP, which obviously means that it's not going to transmit the cold as much as something like a stainless steel one. But there's more to do, because you really got to put this insulated cap over the top, because if you don't, there will be a transfer of cold through to the inner skin, and you'll see all these little dots appear on the inside wall with that bit of thermal bridging. So as thin as this is, it's doing a very important job. A bit like me. Now that is a stress patch, and the whole idea is anywhere on these corners, around windows, doors, any other opening, there is a tendency for it to want to crack up there. It just happens. If you don't believe it, look, the Comet aircraft, it happened with those until they made the windows round. So you just have to make sure that you reinforce that. We're still going to put mesh over the top of it, but this is the first bit. So that's the base coat done. All we've got to do is leave that for 24 hours to dry before we put the primer on, and then another 24 hours after that before we can put the top coat on. Now, you could skip the primer, quite honestly. On this surface it would be fine, but the reason we're using the primer is because we've got a colour change between the base coat and the dark top coat, and to stop anything showing through on the base coat, we're using a pigmented primer which is the same colour as the top coat, so it gives us a fighting chance, if you like. If there's any tiny little bits where the grain has missed, it's covered. Now, there will be people watching this who are wondering about the fire risk with putting this kind of insulation on the outside of a building. Well, this has been tested and it's rated a Class B rating, which means that it won't contribute to the spread of flame. Importantly, you don't get burning droplets. So those situations where you've got cladding on the outside of a building and the burning droplets are spreading the fire downwards as well as the fire running upwards, that will not happen with this insulation.
Right, Roger's asked me to apply this EWI top coat primer to the surface that he's been working on. I've given it a good stir. That's quite important to mix all the chemicals together. There we go. Right, so we've got the primer done, and it's important to leave it 24 hours before we put the top coat on. So Roger's coming in tomorrow, weather permitting, to get the top coat skimmed in. Okay.
So the primer's had time to dry. Now we're going to put the top coat on, which is a 1mm silicone, so it's a little bit unforgiving. You've got to do it right, and we've only just got about enough material to do the job, so I can't afford to drop any on the floor. If I drop it on the floor, I can't scoop it up again, because then you make a real mess. Now, I'm quite happy doing this, but EWI Pro have offered me the services of Paul, who is actually their training guy at the Aylesbury Academy. They've got their own training facility at Aylesbury, and Paul runs one-day courses there. So what tips are you going to give me, Paul?
Basically, this is the 1mm aggregate in the silicone render, so it needs to go on at 1mm thick.
Yeah.
So we put it on just as you would plastering, we apply it, and then we scrape it back to the thickness of the stones that are in it, which in this case is 1mm.
Got it.
And then we can try and texture it.
Put it on, take it off. When you say texture it,
it's texture it with a plastic float.
It's not actually a texture in terms of...
Yeah, all you're trying to do with this is basically roll the stones around to get rid of any trail lines.
Okay.
So you basically just roll it around,
holes.
And it moves the stones around, gets rid of any trail lines, and evens it out to an even thickness.
So what do we put it all on first and then rub it up, or do we go as we go?
I do it as I go. Some people will put the whole wall on.
Yeah.
All depends on your drying times, on the weather and what it's like on the day.
Okay. Okay, so how am I doing, Paul?
Very well, for a novice.
For a novice, yeah.
For your first attempt.
Yeah.
I won't go any further than that.
Okay.
As a beginner, I'll drop back and try and start to texture this, because the joints you leave are where it's going to dry. And as it dries, if you try and rub it, it drags the stones apart and it will leave scars.
Yeah. So we can't have a day joint, basically. We must get the whole thing on.
You need to get the whole wall. I mean, experienced guys would probably put this whole wall on before they start to texture it, but in our case I think we should drop back, start to texture it, and then we'll move on to the...
Yeah, okay, and like you say, it's the weather is everything, isn't it?
Yeah.
I guess it's not just sun, if it's windy as well.
Exactly, it's an air dry material.
Oh, okay.
So as soon as it's out the tub and on the wall, it wants to dry.
And this is a bit I've never done, this plastic floating, yeah?
Yeah, plastic floats or plastic trowels, depends what you want to call them. We call them plastic float.
Yeah.
It's basically just plastic float. You go rub around in circles. We're just trying to roll the stones around to take any trail marks out, anything like that. The important part is to keep it clean. But keep just scraping it off on there.
Got it.
Don't wash it with water. If you wash it with water and put it on the wall, you'll get water marks because it's a water-soluble silicone. Yeah. So that's how we do it.
Now, the reason I called this a float is because it's not like a plastic you know, look like the flexi
No,
trowels
and the
with
reason
the
I
soft edges.
Yeah, the reason I don't call it a float is because traditional sand cement plasterers, it's a big thick polyurethane float.
Yeah, okay.
This isn't.
Right, so we couldn't use a
between-
polyurethane float, right?
Really.
So it's a trowel, but it's a flat trowel,
Yes,
and they sell these at
Yeah,
the
yeah,
EWI store.
they sell all the products in the EWI
All
store.
right, okay, mate. Do you want to show us how to do it then?
Yeah,
Because
we can, yeah. Once the material's on the wall, we need to scrape it back to the thickness of the stones.
Yeah.
Which is a lot thinner than people think. It's a 1 mil stone. So we'll scrape it back, and you can see how much comes off.
Blimey. Wow.
If we scrape it back to the correct
That is a hard scrape, isn't it?
Yeah. If you scrape it back to the correct thickness straight away, it will float up nice.
It's almost done, isn't it?
Yeah.
Basically.
And then all you're doing with this is just rolling the stones
Yeah.
to take out any trail marks.
Any marks, any little holes.
Hole there, underneath, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
And it's important to keep scraping that off. If you're doing it on your own, you need to finish as you go, because it will dry on you.
It's got to be stainless steel.
Yeah, okay.
Otherwise you get black
We'll put it on.
black marks.
Right.
Yeah. I'm scraping it off, but I've noticed you're scraping it off again after me. What would happen if we started floating up with the plastic float on this thickness?
That's a very good point. I can show you.
Yeah.
It will go fluffy and start to drag. Okay.
Ah, okay.
You get all
yeah.
this fluffiness.
It's almost like pricking it up, isn't it?
Yeah. And it sticks to your trowel a lot more.
Got it.
That's why we get it back to the. As I say, if you
Right.
scrape it back to the thickness of the stone straight away, it will rub up really easy.
What about drying time?
In general, 15-20 minutes before you need to rub it up.
Yeah, but what about rain off, you know?
Rain, about 5 to 6 hours,
Oh, okay.
and it can probably take rain.
Yeah.
So it really does depend on the weather.
Yeah, yeah.
In the winter, obviously, you've got to watch your overnight temperatures.
Yeah.
Because if the temperatures are dropping below 5 degrees overnight, it won't set. It won't dry.
So that's it, that's the finished coat on, and I've got to say it's exceeded my expectations, which is always a good thing, isn't it? It actually, to my mind, looks more like a traditional sand and cement finish because it's that 1mm grain, and I think it looks fantastic. It's a self-cleaning surface as well. As it rains, being silicone, it will just wash off, which is beautiful. You don't get that same staining that you get with some other coatings. So what we're going to do is remove this. Now, we've got these special beads on here, so I'm not quite sure how this is going to work out. You could leave it till the reveals are totally dry, say a few hours, 6 hours, come back, but we're going to try it. And the great thing is that with the reveals you can patch them up. If we pull a bit away, we'll just go around with a trowel and patch it up. So let's give it a go. Yeah, how do we do it?
Just take
pull.
it away. Yeah.
And then obviously mind the wall.
Yeah, just be careful because the wall's still wet.
So we've now taken this off, but the bit I'm not sure about is how you take this off. How's that done?
The easiest way I find to take this off is if you pull it towards you, it snaps.
All right, okay.
So if you pull that way, it will snap.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like this.
Oh, I see. Fold it back. All right. Okay, I thought you meant just pull
No,
it straight
and then
off.
if you get the top and peel it straight down.
Wish me luck.
Yeah.
Oh, mate, that's
Not
lovely,
too bad.
isn't it? And because we got that little bead on there, which is the same colour as the window, There's no need to do any silicone in?
No. So they do need a little tidy up, little brush or something, just to brush them in. Because the reveals are wet, it can pick some of it, so you can just run a brush down there and we'll tidy that up.
Alright.
But I'd say so, I match these beads to the windows, because otherwise, if you match it to the colour of the render, it looks like the render's come round onto the frame.
So that's it, that's the external wall insulation system from EWI Pro. Now, this is only a small wall, obviously I was only trying it out for the first time, but you can see you can scale this up. You've got the techniques there, whether you're going around a window or a doorway or anything else, same thing applies. So it's just a question of following the instructions. Don't try and skip bits, don't try and be clever, and then you won't come unstuck. I'm Roger Bisbee, come back to see us soon on Skill Builder. We're going to be doing more of this stuff.